Welcome to the Italian Cultural Institute. Indeed, this evening we are going to present a lecture that's part of the 2010 Chicago Humanities Festival. And the title of the lecture is Caravaggio, the Painter's Body. He's almost a mythical figure of Italian art history. And to talk about him tonight, we have Professor Marco Ruffini, who is an assistant professor of Italian studies and an adjunct professor of art and art history at Northwestern University here in Chicago.
According to the art historian Philip Sohn, Caravaggio is the most famous artist of our time. Sohn is the author of an article appeared in the New York Times last March called Italian Art, Caravaggio outstrips Michelangelo. The success of the recent exhibition dedicated to Caravaggio in Rome and Florence confirmed the increasing popularity of the painter. The title of this lecture refers to my initial intention to talk about the cult of Caravaggio, starting from the analysis of this recent and quite extraordinary events. But I soon realized that this fetishization of Caravaggio is inseparable from the way we look at his art, as a fetish of nature, and are with no visible filtering or mediation on the behalf of the artist. It suffices to compare two versions of the same subject, The Death of the Virgin by Caravaggio and by Federico Zuccari, one of the most famous artists among Caravaggio's contemporaries, to visualize the groundbreaking impact of Caravaggio's art in the way Fry and Kitson refer to it. This is the famous Caravaggio's Death of the Virgin, commissioned by the jurist Laerzio Cherubini in 1601, completed only in 1606 for the Cherubini Chapel in the Church of Santa Maria della Scala in Trastevere in Rome. As we know, the painting was rejected by the Discalced Carmelites, disappointed by the excessive naturalism of the scene. The painting was then bought by the Duke of Mantua and eventually found its way to the Louvre. It was replaced by another altarpiece of identical subject painted by the Venetian contemporary Carlo Saraceni. And this is the Death of the Virgin, actually the transitio, the Virgin's passage from this to the other world, painted by Zuccari in 1584 in the east vault of the Chapel of the Dukes of Urbino in the Santa Casa of Loreto, nearby Ancona. When we compare these images, we praise Caravaggio's because it looks like a faithful representation of a moment of death, a natural fact. On the contrary, Zuccari's image strikes us for its conventionality and explicit idealism. Caravaggio's image is perceived as unintentional, neutral, authentic. Zuccari's as false and insincere. To a modern viewer, the two works appear as irreducible opposites. Caravaggio's contemporary would look at his work from a different point of view. They were equally concerned with the unorthodox naturalism of his images, but they were skeptical and critical of it instead of enthusiastic. According to Bellori, art is a representation of an idea of beauty and truth that sight cannot capture. In order to achieve this goal, painters should form in their mind an example of higher beauty, and by contemplating that, amen nature. Art is an intellectual faculty that can improve nature, furnishing it with moral qualities and ideas that do not appear spontaneously to sight. The direct and filtered imitation of what is visible can only offer illusory and fallacious images. This way of thinking and looking at images grounded in Platonism constituted a dominant conceptual pattern in early modern visual culture. The 17th century critical reception of the Death of the Virgin was based on this theoretical assumption. Bellori wrote that the painting was rejected by the Carmelites, I quote, because the Virgin had been made to look much more like the swollen corpse of an ordinary dead woman. The artist does not imitate what surrounds him or his models in the studio, but exclusively looks at the idea of painting. The engraving visualizes the Lori statement that painters should form in their mind an example of higher beauty. The image of the angel of the rest from the flight into Egypt by Caravaggio clearly evokes the figure of the idea of painting by Zuccari. I would add to this convincing comparison that the relationship between the two images is even clearer if you believe, as I do, that the engraving available to Caravaggio was fragmentary or cut. Besides specific formal affinities, the two images are comparable also on a conceptual ground, being both a sort of manifesto of what art is, or should be.